Election Commission issues show cause notice to Congress President Mallikarjun Kharge over his remarks against Prime Minister. Seeks reply within the next 24 hours. The Supreme Court comes down heavily on Mamata Banerjee for blocking Enforcement Directorate's investigation into IPAC, says such conduct puts democracy in peril. Defence Minister Rajnath Singh hints at India becoming a peacemaker in US-Iran war, says we cannot rule out the possibility of India being a successful mediator, adds that the Prime Minister has appealed to both sides to end the war. An Indian Air Force converts Purvanchal Expressway into emergency landing strip near Sultanpur, conducts preparedness exercise across the 3.2-kilometer stretch. And amid US-Iran standoff over Strait of Hormuz, Iran seizes 2 vessels for maritime violation. One India-bound, another linked to global shipping giant MSC. And our top story at this hour coming by the way of Indus Waters Treaty, a treaty largely beneficial to Pakistan, has been operational for a very long time until, of course, last year, this very day, a deadly terror attack in Pahalgam shook India's conscience and the political will to keep that treaty in abeyance. Now, for 65 long years, India gave Pakistan the better deal on water, and Pakistan used that goodwill as cover to export terror. That equation changed exactly 1 year ago when Pakistani terrorists killed 26 Indians in one of the worst terror attacks in the history of Kashmir in Pahalgam. In the aftermath, India put the Indus Waters Treaty in abeyance. This marked a clear shift from what was often described as a strategic restraint to what can now be seen as a strategic utilization of the Indus water. That's because Pakistan received over 80% of the basin's waters, while India was limited to only 20%, with strict conditions on how to even use this share. And that is history now. The gains for India in the past year have been substantial and largely unreported. On the infrastructure front, 3 major projects, including the Kishan Ganga, Ratle and Shapurkandi, are now moving faster than they have in years, freed from the procedural delays that the Permanent Indus Commission used to impose earlier. In Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh, new canals are being built, and India's own 20% share is now better utilized. Water that was previously being underutilized. Diplomatically, India has done something it has never done before. It has formally linked water to security, making it clear that cross-border terrorism has consequences that go beyond military retaliation. However, across the border, the situation becomes dire. Pakistan is now facing a severe freshwater crisis, particularly in the Sindh region, where crop yields are plummeting. Crop output is under pressure in a country where agriculture makes up for nearly 25% of the GDP and employs over 40% of the workforce. This physical water shortage has triggered internal political chaos, pitting provinces against each other and sending energy costs soaring by as much as 150%. And as Pakistani public begins to question their leadership security-first approach, Islamabad has turned to West to regain the narrative. It has launched a sophisticated global campaign to reframe the IWT suspension as a humanitarian crisis and a violation of the international law. It is finding willing amplifiers in the Western think tanks, international platforms, and even multilateral forums, including the Chatham House. The prestigious London-based International Affairs Institute recently carried out expert commentary calling the treaty a foundation for building trust, describing India's decision as instrumental tool in conflict, calling for international actors to intervene in what it frames as a fragile and conflict-affected region. The language is also carefully chosen. India is being framed as an aggressor. Pakistan's role in creating the condition for this moment, decades of cross-border terrorism, is nowhere in the picture. It's completely ignored. And this is not an accident. The timing of this literature is suspicious, and that these articles are calling for external intervention while ignoring why India suspended the treaty in the first place is also questionable. Terrorism is being referred to as militancy. The campaign is coordinated, funded, and well-timed. It runs parallel to Pakistan's own rebranding exercise, positioning itself as a peacemaker in the Iran-US conflict in West Asia, nominating Donald Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize. So the big questions that we're asking tonight: why is the West ignoring the link between water and cross-border terror? When Western think tanks call for international intervention on the IWT without mentioning Pahalgam, is that analysis or advocacy? And if India stays silent while Pakistan builds up a narrative war in the global forums, does it risk winning the water battle but losing the diplomatic war? Joining me on the show is Ambassador Baswati Mukherjee, former Indian diplomat. Also with us is Air Commodore Ashminder Singh Behal, defense and strategy expert. Adit Kothari, geopolitical expert, is also with us. Ambassador, I want to come to you first. It's been 1 year, ma'am, since the deadly Pahalgam terror attack. And as we commemorate the Indian Air Forces, what they achieved in the aftermath and how India fought back terror, we're also looking at a campaign of sorts, not just emerging from the West, but also emerging within Pakistan, where, there's been an effort being made by the media, by Western think tanks, NGOs, to portray India as an aggressor while completely ignoring Pakistan's history. How do we really counter this narrative?
Thank you, Shweta, for having this debate. I'm so glad that you talked about Kishan Ganga. I was ambassador to the Netherlands when the Pakistanis brought the Kishan Ganga to the International Court of Justice for arbitration. I was part of the delegation, and I was very proud of the fact that our delegation consisted of top Indian legal experts, while the Pakistani delegation consisted of only American lawyers. So I'd like to highlight that when the IWC was first accepted by India, it was done under Western pressure, which we should never have accepted, but maybe because of our economic condition. I don't like to criticize our first Prime Minister in public. As time went on, it became increasingly clear that it was a totally unequal treaty where the upper riparian has no rights. Our population has increased, our requirements have increased, we need to develop J&K, and the Pakistanis were just not utilizing the water adequately. They were not even using it for irrigation as it was intended to. As our Prime Minister said 1 year ago, and you rightly quoted, that blood and water does not flow together. We've done the right thing. It would be naive of us to expect that these Western think tanks, including Chatham House, would support us. They have always supported Pakistan. Pakistan was created as a Western creation to check India's rise. So we don't have to be surprised at anything the Western think tanks, etc. do. But one can be sure of the fact that if this is resulting in internal conflict within Pakistan, which even the dear Pakistani field marshal running like a Western puppet from Tehran to Islamabad, etc., making a fool of himself in front of the international community, he is not going to be able to change our decision on IWT through any amount of Western pressure. We are not a country that is a banana republic, and we don't bow to Western pressure. If we did it when we were first established, maybe it was for other reasons I don't want to get into. But right now, I'm very happy to hear from you that it's causing internal conflict. It will cause much more internal conflict if it results in the breaking up of Pakistan. That would be the best news that I have heard of. And I am sure that these internal conflicts will cause a deeper widening because it hits Punjab, which is the very heart of the Pakistani state as we know it. The field marshal and the Pakistani prime minister, etc., all come from that state. So they should understand that their terror tactics have resulted in their going through decades of drought, hunger, starvation, etc., unless they decide to change their policies. And for that, running like a puppet from Tehran to Islamabad is not going to get them one drop of water from the Indus water, which belongs to India and which we should never have agreed to in the first place.
All right. Thank you for your comments to begin with in this debate, Air Commodore. Taking this conversation forward, as we see this ecosystem developing, as we see more and more articles, research papers, being pushed out, including by Chatham House, what should India's strategy be? What should India's response be? Because this does look like a concerted attempt being made to paint India as an aggressor here.
Absolutely, Shweta. Thank you and Jai Hind for inviting me to this vital discussion with such eminent co-panelists. Let me tell you at the first that this is a diplomatic leverage tool. And the treaty has not been abrogated. It has been suspended till Pakistan credibly and irrevocably abjures its support for cross-border terrorism. So Pakistan has to just leave the path of terrorism and we are back on the table. That is one. Number two, there has been a fundamental change of circumstances. There is an article in the Vienna Convention which clearly states that if there is a fundamental change in the conditions, such as the water stress, or you saw the way Punjab and northern parts of Haryana were affected by floods last year, and there is so much of shortage of water in Punjab and northern parts of Haryana that we actually need to have a revisit to this treaty. And we did request them in 2023 that let us renegotiate. In fact, Pakistan never met the commission since 2022. So it is that Pakistan was not serious till it got affected. Secondly, and very importantly, all treaties and agreements are there when there is friendship, when there is peace, when there is cooperation, and not when a country uses terrorism as a tool to bleed India through 1,000 cuts. So when we are using that tool, it is necessary for us to tell them that you cannot have agreements, even though it were brokered by World Bank 64 years or 64 years back when it was first suspended last year. But at this time, let me just offer my condolences to all the families who have lost their loved ones last year for the heinous act that was carried out by Soleimani and other terror elements which were nurtured, trained, sent and coordinated, and their actions were being reported there. So we have enough proof to indicate that Pakistan's hand was there. The other issues that come up, and very important issues that come up when we talk of legal conditions, is when we go into any form of negotiations. For example, in the treaty it is written permanent court of arbitration, but in that permanent court of arbitration we need to have parties from both sides. It cannot be that you do it from one side. Fourthly, it is very important to understand that narrative building has been a positive of Pakistan always. After losing the Op Sindoor war, the way they had portrayed as if India had lost the war. And despite all the Western analysts clearly saying that India had caused irrevocable damage to their armed forces. So now when we are looking at all this, probably we also need to look at how to employ our foreign embassies. Since I worked 3 years and I'm very fortunate to see Ambassador Ma'am here, in 3 years in Indian embassy in Dhaka. I can tell you that they are very important tool and they do
Absolutely.
an exceptionally good work. And this is where we need to build our own research papers. This is where we need to build our own diplomatic initiative. Though we did send teams at that time, but this attitude has to be continued forward, especially when we are looking at Sawalkot 1856 megawatt, which we have started with the tendering action after 40 years when Pakistan didn't leave it to happen, or Bursar or Tulbul. We are looking at conditions where we can put Pakistan into an existential threat. Not that we want them to starve, because 90% of their
Absolutely.
food comes from the Indus Water Treaty basin, because of the 25% of their GDP comes from there. It is not that we want them to starve, especially when 44% population in Pakistan is virtually on starvation level. But what we are telling them is, look, sit with us after you provide us credible evidence that you are leaving the path of terrorism. My respects again to those families who lost their loved ones.
Thank you, Air Commodore. Adit, if the pressure builds, what are some of the challenges India is looking at? Legally, morally, what are the challenges that India is looking at? Because Air Commodore rightly pointed out, the idea is not to starve a population, but to ensure that enough and more action is taken. Action, proof of which can be rendered to India, that Pakistan is finally waking up to the reality, waking up to the fact that it can no more be a harbour and a sponsor of terror if it wants that Indus Water Treaty to be kept and to be held by India as well. So how do we then respond to some of the threats that could be emerging if this narrative were to get stronger?
So I think, if you look at the narrative that Chatham House tried to stitch up, it stands on very flimsy ground. They completely disregard the fact that, as an upper riparian, country, we are actually giving much more. It's completely, there is no other treaty in the world which can match the Indus Water Treaty. So our share of the water is also being utilized by the Pakistanis. So the sharing ratio needs to be 80-20. Not only are they mismanaging their own share of water, but whatever India is letting go of their share, their proportion, they're also mismanaging that. And as a consequence, they have actually not invested anything within the infrastructure of their plants, of their desilting. Pakistan hasn't gone through the desilting process in decades. So it's a complete shoddy mismanagement job of the Pakistani establishment, which is being deflected in the grand scheme of things, and which is why Chatham House has been paid to run this cheap narrative. And look at the irony of it all. They're using an Indian to actually write this particular feral narrative. It's Bhargavi Bhardwaj. She's a graduate from London School of Economics who's actually writing this particular narrative, and she's been exposed on social media multiple number of times. But I think, let us call out the Indian government and let us acknowledge their stance. The fact that they've decided to show spine, that faucets of water cannot go hand in hand with spilling of blood. I mean, that is, the message which has gone out to Pakistan. This could have gone much more kinetic, but instead of taking it kinetic, all India is doing is India sending out a warning that, you better, dismantle your terror infrastructure, or else, we will have to stop cooperating with you on the Indus Water Treaty. India is actually not stopping the flow of water. What they're doing is far more, will have far more sinister consequences in Pakistan, especially during the monsoon seasons, when there is no intelligence sharing done between India and Pakistan, and the warnings of floods, which are normally provided to Pakistan way in advance, if they do not come at time, that could have devastating impact, especially in Punjab region, which is maximum beneficiary of the Indus Water Treaty. So all in all, I think India has done a fantastic job from that perspective. Internally, India is also, coming up, like Air Commodore Singh basically pointed out, that we're coming up with the 1800 megawatt project, the Sawalkot hydroelectric project, and then we also have reservoir flushing that is happening in Salal and Bagilgar. So all of these projects which are happening within a year's time demonstrates that, India is very serious about this subject. And Pakistan really has only one option with them, which is to dismantle their terror infrastructure. All of this, using Western academia and Western pressure houses is going to really have no impact on India. Madam Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee pointed out about Fali Nariman basically fighting that case of the Kishan Ganga in 2012. Pakistan still hasn't paid the damages of those legal damages to India yet. So I don't think they really have an option to go legal in the grand scheme of things. They really have no funds to either, solve the problem internally or go legal. So Pakistan's quite in a bit of a bind at this point, Shweta.
All right, Adit, thank you for that. Ambassador, practically, does India have enough infrastructure capacity? I know you talked about the infrastructure projects to, to stop or divert water from the western rivers like Jhelum and Indus. And to what extent do you think the water that India is now holding on, hydro and storage projects can now be built at a faster capacity now that there is, no legal binding, no treaty limitations for India? What do you see happening with the Indus Waters Treaty if it were to be kept in abeyance a year or two from now?
I think, Shweta, it's going to be kept in abeyance for a long time.
Okay.
We are going ahead at a furious and frenetic pace with infrastructure. And as Adit rightly pointed out, we won the Kishan Ganga arbitration, but they did not respect the result of the arbitration. Each time we would try to use the Indus water for bringing development with our small 20% share, even that they would bring for arbitration through the World Bank to the ICJ. We are now utilizing this procedure to bring about much needed hydroelectricity and development in J&K, and at the same time to push for a renewed impetus in our part of the Punjab and Haryana, etc., with regard to this precious water. I may like to add that because we were getting all this water for free, virtually, for all these decades, because of the foolishness on our part to not understand that we were giving them free water, and in return we were being victimized. We had to fight wars against them. We should have done this a long time ago. But in any case, Shweta, in my opinion, they are in no position to renegotiate the treaty because these two people, the Field Marshal and the Prime Minister, are deeply unpopular within Pakistan. They cannot afford to renegotiate. That when there will be drought, famine and starvation in Punjab, they will lose whatever little credibility they have. In which case, they will be forced into political change internally, which will then bring about a change in their foreign policy vis-a-vis India, because these people regard hostility and hatred of India, as seen in Pahalgam 1 year ago, as the raison d'etre for Pakistan. And that raison d'etre is welcomed by many Westerners because they think that it keeps India's rise in check. So I don't see us going back on IWC. It's in abeyance. That's the correct language to use according to the treaty. It will remain in abeyance for a long time. We have every right to keep it in abeyance. And yes, if there is a change of heart, maybe 50 years from now, we'll take another look at it. That's it. I don't see it being changed in the near future. I think they just got a huge shock. It's what is called a reality check. When we did what we did, we should have done it a long, long time.
All right, should have done it long time ago. India has been gracious, Air Commodore, as many experts would point out today, after years and years of terror attacks, dealing with Pakistan-sponsored terror on Indian soil, providing dossiers on dossiers and looking at absolutely no concrete measures being taken by Pakistan. India finally, after years of that, finally last year, decided to keep the Indus Waters Treaty in abeyance. Do you agree with Ambassador, but that perhaps the Indus Waters Treaty is likely to be kept in abeyance for a very long time to come? Because there is no hope that Pakistan, apart from, taking perhaps India to legal forums, questioning India, building a narrative, there's nothing that Pakistan can do or will do in order to convince India that it's taken hard steps?
Shweta, I don't disagree with the ambassador, ma'am, but I have a slightly different view. The first thing is the impact of the treaty will come to be visible this year primarily, because now is the time when really the water shortages will start in Pakistan. That is one. Then after that, it is followed by the rainy season. That's the time when we don't share the data or the information and they don't have any advanced warning, that's the time floods. So it's going to be either drought or it's going to be floods. So this is the time they will start realizing the worth of India. And simultaneously, we are accelerating the projects. We have mentioned Kishanganga, Rattle, we have mentioned Sawalkot, where tendering process is on Tulbul. Now imagine when these projects get accelerated as India is fully intending to do, then what is going to happen to Pakistan besides the regular run of the water that is reaching them primarily and before the dams or the others get actually projects get actually implemented. So when Pakistan gets hit with all this and when Punjab and Sindh get into a fight, because if you remember last year in trying to woo the Punjabis, Munir had actually decided to build canals in Punjab area, that is
Right.
Pakistani Punjab. And that's the time there was a huge hue and cry from Sindh. If you remember after Op Sindoor, when their trucks were going back with soldiers, people were pelting stones on them. So that was the kind of antipathy which Sindh has now got with Punjab. And now this is going to be aggravated from now, that is in May onwards, right up to September, October. And that's the time Pakistan will start realizing. So maybe this year not, maybe next year not, but in a few years, they would understand that no court in the world, no arbitration in the world, and no country in the world can coerce us because our leadership has decided that no more to Pakistan in case they carry on with terrorism. So I have a thinking that over a period of time, the Pakistani public, especially when they get hit with food security and the prices rise as they have been rising for the last few years, and when they start feeling the pinch, they are itself are going to pressurize their government to do something and the change will start. So it may happen in 2 years, it may happen in 3 years, but I'm sure it is not going to take 50 years and there may be
Okay.
solutions found in future.
Okay, so you're hopeful that perhaps in the next few years we could see some sort of solution going forward. But, you know, Adit, I have to ask you to weigh in on what's happening today geopolitically, and that is Pakistan seemed to be getting some goodwill there by the way of its negotiations, trying to play as a peacemaker between Iran and the US, and being talked about for its role, in the world community, international community today, recognizing Pakistan's efforts, whatever little, in trying to build that bridge between Iran and the US and trying to avert a war that could get worsened by the day. And in your assessment, therefore, could Pakistan now use some of that goodwill against India? Could it therefore push, other Western players who have always been very friendly, for that matter, US, American president in the past few days has often talked about Asim Munir, Shehbaz Sharif in many good ways. Do you believe that Pakistan could be using some of that goodwill against India?
Shweta, if you and I had an errand boy like Asim Munir, I think, we would have lauded them as well. So at the end of it all, Asim Munir and Shehbaz Sharif are just errand boys of Donald Trump. I mean, we've seen their kind of conduct and, how they're trying to bid for the United States narrative to the Iranians, which now the Iranians have themselves understood and exposed on social media. So yes, you're quite right about the newfound geopolitical relevance that Pakistan has suddenly found. Where India had essentially put them into a complete geopolitical abyss over the last decade or so, and now suddenly finding this relevance is making them feel very excited. But we also have to look at it from a domestic Pakistani perspective. Asim Munir and Shehbaz Sharif, when they came into power, when this hybrid regime came into power, they were not very popular because of everything that happened with PTI and Imran Khan. So they are also trying to buy domestic legitimacy, and that is a consequence of this particular newfound emboldenment, is that even the most ardent Imran Khan supporter, the most ardent PTI supporter, is today advocating Asim Munir and Shehbaz Sharif too. So that domestic legitimacy has emboldened Pakistan to a great extent. And that in turn will be quite catastrophic for India in the
Right.
near future, because whenever Pakistan is strategically emboldened, it has always caused pain. It has always inflicted pain on India. Sorry, you wanted to say something.
Should we be worried about it? Therefore, so far I think India has maintained a very firm line. If Pakistan is doing some good, after all, let it do that good. And we as a channel, we as an organization have refrained from commenting on it. But should India be worried?
Overtly, I think diplomatically, whatever India has done to laud Pakistan's efforts to basically facilitate this deal, not mediate, facilitate it, I think was the right thing to do. I don't think India should have got involved in any shape and form, because this is not our monkey, not our circus. There are 4 players in this grand scheme of things in this particular conflict. You can't please all of them. And Israel most likely is going to sabotage this deal, because it is not in their interest to ensure that, Iran basically emerges as a hegemonist power in West Asia, which is what is happening at the moment. So, India should keep away, but at the same time, India should rely on its nimble diplomacy, which is what we have been doing for so many, for a decade or so, and we should continue with that particular approach. But yes, we need to keep our guards up. From an asymmetrical warfare perspective, because Pakistan has used that in the past and will continue to use that in the future, because that is their only ploy. That is a stated policy, a stated governmental objective of Pakistan, to bleed India with 1,000 cuts.
And for a country, Ambassador, which has never used its goodwill in the right fashion in the past 78 years of its existence, I think the fact that it has suddenly found some sort of legitimacy in the international corridors amongst some of the most powerful people on earth, are you a bit skeptical of what Pakistan would do by the way of peddling its own narrative?
I'm not skeptical, because this is not the first time it's happened.
Okay.
If you remember, Musharraf had the full support. Who started Kargil, for instance? They have had their Western sponsors for a long time. After a long time, they have found somebody who is capable of making a fool out of his country's good name, and that is the Field Marshal along with Shehbaz Sharif. I actually think that they're doing a splendid job of making a complete fool of themselves. It doesn't bother me at all. It doesn't bother the Indian Foreign Service at all. And let's not forget also, Shweta, that according to the American Constitution, Trump is not going to get a 3rd term, and the midterms are in November. So I think let's just brace ourselves for a long hot summer, followed by a good monsoon, followed by some good monsoon harvest as far as foreign policy of India is concerned. Thank you, Shweta.
All right. Thank you for that, Ambassador. Before I let you all go, Air Commodore, would you like to weigh in on that? What are you making of that newfound goodwill of our neighboring country?
First of all, if they are able to bring about peace, I think we all love it, because India itself has 85% of oil and a large amount of LNG and LPG, which is imported through Straits of Hormuz. But it's my opinion that they are mostly being used as a messenger boy to carry messages from one place to another. And if you see in the last 2 days, there has been a minor change that IRGC is taking more control now, especially Wahidi from behind the scenes. And he's now bringing in that control with a strong amount of inflexibility. So it's a very tough situation at this time. But both countries need to stop the war, in the sense that both countries want to stop the war, and they have found Pakistan as one element which is in between available, who doesn't say no to anyone, because they need the funds, they need the oil, and they need American support. So it's like this, they have to please Trump, they have to please Iran, they have to please the Middle East, they have to please everybody, Saudi Arabia to get $3 billion and then another $2 billion, and like that, and UAE they have to give. So what I personally feel is that despite Pakistan just being a messenger boy, some good is taking place. And if India at this period, like our Honorable Defense Minister was mentioning, that maybe India would also start now pitching in. And if they do that, especially when the ground is right, because Pakistan is punching much above its politico-economic weight. And this is the only country which has that kind of a weight is India, and nobody else. So I personally feel that maybe a little bit word here and there by India may actually pull it towards a solution.
All right. There seems to be some agreement or disagreement on that, but that's all the time I have. Ambassador Mukherjee, Air Commodore, Adit, thank you very much, all of you. It's an important debate. We are, of course, discussing the aftermath of Indus Waters Treaty being kept in abeyance. It's been 1 year since the deadly Pahalgam terror attack, and as India remembers the people who lost their lives to that heinous crime, we're also looking at what should be our foreign policy direction going forward vis-a-vis our neighbouring countries that continues to be a sponsor of terrorism. We'll slip into a very short break. We'll be back in just a bit.
Down Cool Street.
When you're hot, we'll cool you down on Cool Street. On Cool Street. On Cool Street. Ooh, I'm on cool. Chill your bill. I'm on cool. Chill your bill.
I'm on Cool. Chill your bill.
After a blockbuster first season, where corporate giants and industry leaders ruled the court, TV9 Network presents the ultimate corporate badminton championship season 2. A battle of skill, speed and supremacy with a massive 5 lakh rupee prize pool across categories at Pulela Gopichand Badminton Academy, Gachibowli, Hyderabad from the 15th to the 17th May 2026.